This is the Xcut Express. It's a craft die cutting machine. It's not designed for what we're using it for, but it's perfectly adequate. And as you can see, it's nice and compact. There's other things you could use. There's a list on my website of all sorts of possibilities to get around the whole fact that you need some kind of press. So this is the Xcut. It looks a little bit like a sandwich toaster, and it has a handle, okay, and it opens like this, so it's really handy to move around. It weighs about 7 kilograms. It comes with an A4 bed and some die cutting equipment. The A4 bed isn't really long enough for us, so you have to get hold of another one. But I'll just show you first, before I do that, how we set it up. It comes with these trays, which you could just take out, but I tend to keep them in there. But you need to take them out and you need to lock it. Okay, that stops this flapping around. And then if they tuck quite neatly, that way round. Okay, if I hold it on its side, if the camera can see that, what we've got inside is 2 rollers. There's my fingers in between them. 2 rollers, okay, and what this dial does on top, it pushes the top roller down. I'll do some close-up shots so you can see. It pushes the top roller down, all the way down to the bed. Okay, if you have a different kind of die cutter, you need to pack up so that your paper and your plate and your bed meet your roller at the right pressure. Putting it all the way up. So for a bed, what I use, and you could, as long as it's solid, doesn't really matter. It could be MDF, it could be ply. This is, if you can see that, it's a piece of that melamine, that plastic catering cutting mat. It comes as a 60 something centimeters by 40 something, 60 by 42 I think it is, and basically you just kind of chop it. It doesn't really matter. I've cut it with a jigsaw. Okay, you might get someone to do it for you neater. I've cut it with a jigsaw, so it walks a little bit, but that's not important. What's important is that it goes in. I'm in a very small space here. It goes in freely, okay? So it can move around freely. It can be as long as you like. And if you look on my website, I've got some 75 centimeter long prints, and I've done 120 centimeter long prints. Obviously your width is restricted by the width of your roller. Your length could be as long as a piece of plank that you've got that can act as a bed. This is about 12 millimeters thick. I wouldn't necessarily go for any thinner than that, otherwise you'll be doing an awful lot of packing. You also need some kind of felt. This felt I bought from Lawrence's in the UK. It's specifically for etching presses, but any felt will do, anything smooth. So I have in the past used smooth yoga mats, carpet underlay, felt you can buy on eBay, just like a dense felt. As long as it doesn't have a texture and it's spongy, it's fine. And you only need 1 piece. With a big etching press, you often have 3 pieces, and that's a whole different complicated thing, which we really don't need at the moment. And you need some paper. This is just newsprint to keep everything, try and keep everything nice and clean. I need 1 for the underneath, and I need 1 for on top. And then my felt goes in there. So I'm going to show you what that does. If I push the roller all the way down, okay, it's going to move. And this way, okay, and you'll get it when you get there. Okay, that's what it does. In this video, I'm going to show you how to ink and wipe a plate ready for printing on the press. The inks I use are these Aqua Intaglio. I like them because they're the perfect consistency for the kind of plates that I make, but there's plenty of other inks out there. If you find you've got an ink that's too stiff, you just need to add a little oil to loosen it up. I apply it with either a children's toothbrush, nice and soft, or a rubber spreader. You could use credit cards, anything you can think of that's going to push the ink into the plate. The palette knife is to put the ink on my palette. Also on here I've got gloves. The ink is extremely intense and it really gets into your fingernails. This is scrim. You don't have to use scrim. You could use some cotton sheeting, some linen, as long as it's something that's not going to have any lint or let go of any fluff. You don't want any fluff in your print, but just see what you have. Scrim is traditionally used because it's just the right kind of stuff to get off some ink but not take it all away. It comes like this and it's quite stiff. You need to soften it. You can either soften it by rubbing it together, which is what I tend to do to get the starch off, or you can wash it. Okay, whatever's most convenient for you, but it needs to be so soft, otherwise it can scratch your plate. On that note, I wouldn't use a toothbrush if I'm printing up a dry point plate, a plastic dry point plate, because they have a tendency to scratch even though they're really soft. Also I have some tissue paper, or either of these will do, tissue paper or telephone directory paper. I like telephone directory paper because it's easily available, but less available these days because people aren't really using them very much. You can't use newsprint, it's too shiny. It needs to be a matte paper. A friend of mine has given me some seed catalogue papers. They seem to be fine too. Okay, so either of those for wiping. This is a baby wipe. That's obviously what that's for, and I'll show you in a minute. And these are what we call paper fingers, for picking up the paper so that you don't get mucky fingers. So that's pretty much all you need. And of course, your plate. I'm printing this one today. This has been printed before, so it has soaked in some of the pigments. Before they're printed, they look nice and clean. But this is one that I have printed before. So what you need to do is, having made your plate, if you're intending to print more than one, it's a good idea to put some varnish or some polymer medium around the edges and on the back. It just helps with the cleaning. And if you're using mount card, you'll find that if you don't seal the edges, the ink can seep in. And when you go to the press, you end up with kind of like squidged edges all the way around, which you may not want. So I'm going to print that one. Let's see how we get on. Okay, I'm picking up a little bit of, you don't need much at all, okay? It's amazing how little you need. And I'm just pushing it gently into my plate. And once I'm happy, I've pretty much got a good even coat. As I said before, I could have used one of these, although these, if you've got a very textural plate, it's quite hard to push these around, but they're very good for getting off the excess. Because having got the ink in the plate, our job next is to take it off the surface to reveal all our whites and midtones. Okay, it's amazing how much can come off. That just looks like a black thing on the film now. Hopefully you can see if I hold it against the light. You can see the textures of the plate. And now I've got to reveal it. So I'm just going to get another baby wipe just to clean. Keeping the clean is really quite important. Right, this is the point where the scrim comes in. You don't have to use scrim. You could go straight for tissue paper, but you'll be doing it for longer. And what the scrim does, or some soft fabric will do, is it pushes. If you push down in a kind of circular motion, you're pushing the ink even further into that plate. But at the same time, you're taking it off. What I'm not doing is scrubbing it. I'm pushing it with a kind of circular motion. If you scrub it, you risk getting the ink out from the areas that you want. If it's getting too mucky, roll around. And what I find is when I'm doing a lot of printing, I will have one that's incredibly mucky that I'll use to get the bulk of it off. And then I'll go to a cleaner piece like this for the final wipe. So there's always maybe 2 bits of scrim on the go. I'm not trying to not overdo it, but it's a firm pressure. Okay, I pretty much think you learn by experience. I've pretty much got it off as much as I can with that. Next thing, and if I do it with the tissue, you'll probably see it better. Holding the tissue or the telephone directory paper dead flat. Don't be tempted to fold it or screw it up, because then your hand goes flat too. If it's a large plate, this isn't particularly large, but I'll have one that I'm holding my hand on to hold the plate down, and one that's doing the polishing. And you can see what's coming off. So we've put it into the plate, we've taken off the excess, flip it over, we've taken off the excess, and now we're polishing. And you can see how the lights are being revealed. They're coming back. Turning it round, keeping it going. Fresh piece of tissue. And you can see how now there's hardly anything coming off. If you're holding it flat, you really can't overdo this. You're not taking it out from inside the plate, you're taking it off the surface. And if you don't do it enough, you won't get your tones. And it's the tones that we're after from all these textures. I think that's pretty much it. Oh, where I've got a bit of rogue. There's a bit of silk on this card. And I've got a rogue thread or 2. They've gone. Let's just go for the clean piece and you'll see what I mean. There. Okay, hardly anything coming off at all. Again, clean up my space. The next job with a baby wipe or a soft cloth is to go around your edges. It's amazing how much comes off. I use a clean one, you can see actually. It's amazing how much comes away at the edges. And finally, depending on how mucky you are, maybe a bit of a wipe on the back to see how you go. Okay, so that's inked and good to go. Now the joy of using the Xcut intaglio is I could print this tomorrow. I don't have to print it now. Sometimes I'm working on a lot of plates. I will have an inking day and wiping day, and then clean my hands, clean the studio, and the following day doing the printing, because the Xcut intaglio will not dry on the plate. I think it's the only brand that won't do that. I think most of the other brands of printing inks have more dryers in them, but this one seems to have very few. So you're not in a rush, okay? It's not like paint. We don't have to wait. We don't have to rush to get this onto the plate. We can take our time and get the inking done. On that note, before I carry on, there's nothing to stop you. There's things you could do to this at this stage. I could, for example, roll on some relief ink. Oil-based, obviously, and that would pick up in a different color, and that would pick up the heights. Okay, I'll show that to you in another demonstration, but at this stage I could use my baby wipe if I wanted to, and I could go in and wipe away. If I do it on this bit, we'll see how it comes out. Look, I can take away some of the ink. Okay, just to see what that will do. All right, but that one's good to go. The next thing you need is some paper. This is 2 50-gram watercolor paper, and I've had it in soak here for probably about half an hour. You can get away with 5 or 10 minutes, but it needs to soak up. Obviously, the thicker your paper, the more it needs to soak. And then we just need to blot it. So let the water drain off. Lay it on some blotting paper and another piece on top. Okay. So basically what you're wanting is damp paper that no longer has a sheen. Okay, so the water has come off the surface. If you use with the aqua intaglio, because it is water soluble, if you have too much water, you might find a bit of a blur. If you're using an oil-based ink, that isn't an issue at all. Okay, so they're really only differences. You can see here a little mucky corner. Look at that. That's where I've got sticky fingers. What I should have done is gone for my paper corners to pick up my paper, but as you know me by now, I'm a messy worker. Okay. This is what you're meant to do. That goes down and that goes there. Okay. The idea is to try and keep your corners, keep your paper free of fingerprints. Sign of a good printmaker, or certainly a good worker, I should say. That's what our paper corners are for, to make sure our paper keeps nice and clean. Now I've used blotting paper here. You can use smooth tea towels or smooth sheeting. Sometimes I'm running a huge workshop with 5 presses and 20 people. I just use a huge duvet cover that I keep folding and drying and folding and drying. So because that much blotting paper will just be ridiculous. Because if you leave blotting paper damp, it goes mouldy, and then you've got problems with your prints. But blotting paper is traditionally, but smooth sheeting or smooth linen tea towels work perfectly well. Nothing with a texture on. Anything that's got a texture on is you're going to get that texture coming up in your print. Okay, I've moved my Xcut along a little bit so that you get a better view of what's happening here, which is the important bit. So I've got my felt, I've got my newsprint, and I've got some clean newsprint at the bottom to keep my bed nice and clean. And I've got my inked plate that goes ink side up. I'm not worrying at this stage about registering this because I'm not intending at this stage to print more, that paper to go through the press more than once, so the plates have to be in the same place. But that is something I will discuss another time. I have my damp paper that's been blotted, and I'm carefully laying that. Again, if I was worried about this, I would mark off to get all my angles right, etc., etc. But this really is just a demo thing. Okay, so the damp paper's gone down there. The newsprint is going there. The felt is going there, and I put my pressure down to full. A lot of that will depend on the thickness of your plate and the thickness of your bed. What you don't want to do is push this handle onto so much pressure that you break your handle, but you do need enough pressure to suck that ink out of the paper. So it'll be a trial and error thing. You should better hear it jump when it goes past. There we go. That's fine. That's happy. If I'd felt there wasn't enough pressure, it was too smooth, and I was already fully down, then you need to go underneath your plate on top of the bed with some shims of card or even thin sheets of paper. Amazing how little you need. Okay, so some dry paper, dry watercolor paper, for example, or any paper, just stack it up until you get the pressure that you want. You'll get to know when your pressure is right. Just going to move that along a little bit so you can see. I can see from here, I'm not sure that you can see, that I've got a lovely embossed area. So I'm confident that that pressure was right. It certainly felt right. It felt nice and tight on the plate. And if I pull that across there, okay. So this is my print from this plate, and I'll do some close-up shots of those. It's always worth doing. There's a lot of ink still in here. I always run through a ghost print. Because often they can become the backgrounds for something else if they're quite pale, and this is quite a dark print. Okay, I like it, but it's dark. So while it's all set up and good to go, we'll run through again. You'll also find that if you're printing a lot from the same plate, it gets squashed down. Okay, so your pressure changes then. A lot of printmakers will be appalled the fact that I go through twice. Traditionally, you're meant to go through all the way and then take it away from here. I personally quite like to end up where I've started. And I think going through twice just gets that little bit more ink onto your paper. The downside of going through twice is if your plate has in any way shifted, well, it tends not to, but it's shifted, you're going to get a blurred image if it goes through twice. Okay. There we go. So that's my ghost, which I'm quite liking. So just to recap, so this was the plate. It's the card plate, and I put some silk organza down, and on top of that there's a mixture of all sorts of things, including heavy body white acrylic at the top, that big splash at the top, and some micaceous iron oxide and various other products. So this was the first print that I took from that plate. It's quite a dense, dark print because the silk has held on to an awful lot of the ink. As is often the way, the ghost print, as this one is, gives more tonal variety. I still have some darks in there and I have my whites, but I have a wider range of different tones or values. Hopefully this short video has given you some idea of how I like to ink and print my plates. Do head over to the rest of my YouTube videos for more creative inspiration. Thank you.